All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on not just the goings on here at the southern tip of Africa, but also some goings on there in the United States. But as you know, as always with this channel, shining a light on issues and discussing issues that are both relevant to my South African listeners and to my many international listeners as well. As my audience realized with the little theme coming to the fore. Last week, I had a constitutional scholar, Professor Koos Milan, on to talk specifically about the South African Constitution and its implications for the reality that we experience on a daily basis. And tonight, I'm joined by Wade Stotts, the host of The Wade Show with Wade, and he's going to be talking about the American Constitution, particularly regarding a video that he posted that really ignited a hot debate in the United States. The video simply called, "Yes, the US Constitution is Dead," and we're going to be getting into that. That's a real interesting topic there. Wade, welcome on the show. A long-time listener, first-time invite for you here on this channel.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
So let's start off with the meat and potatoes question. And you actually start your video with answering this question as well. And that is, what is a constitution? And maybe before you answer there, I think a lot of people just take it for granted, that question. They think, I know exactly what the answer to that question is. Why would you even start with that? So we can skip that. But if you really put someone on the spot, I think they start realizing maybe it's not as simple to really answer that question. So let's see where you start off with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Begin.
Yeah. So I think the key question here is the unwritten Constitution versus the written one. So when people think of constitutions, they tend to think of the time we write things down. My thought on this is shaped a lot by the philosopher Joseph de Maistre, and he talked about how what constitutes a people is something that starts off as an unwritten thing. It's this way of being that at some point really is stronger than a written version of a constitution. And so there are all of these assumptions about the way the world works, what I can expect from another person, what I can expect from the state, and that those things are stronger than when you write them down, because usually when you write down a constitution, when you write down and say, this is what we are, that comes at a time where the unwritten constitution is under threat at those exact points. And so that's why those constitutions are by nature selective and limited, because they are trying to address the problems that have arisen at a particular time. And so maybe an illustration of this that might be helpful is people talk about, hey, why does if America is a Christian nation, if the United States is a Christian nation, then why isn't that mentioned at every point within the US Constitution? And one of the reasons why is that wasn't under threat at the time. That wasn't one of the issues that they were having to address. And so they didn't feel the need to address it there. There are plenty of places to find Christian themes and in American documents. But the Constitution is not sort of brimming with Christian commitments. Benjamin Franklin Morris wrote a book called The Christian Life and Character of the Civil Institutions of the United States. Great book, and it just is basically a compendium of all of the original sources talking about Christianity in the founding. But again, that wasn't at issue when in the writing of the Constitution, and so there were other things that the written Constitution was addressing. So really, Joseph de Maistre, his point here is that societies can't be sort of rationalistically designed from scratch, and that tends to be how people think of written constitutions. That's what we do. We sit down and we write, this is what we're going to be. But that's not the way things really happen. What happens is there's a way of life, a way of being that has over time sort of evolved, and then a written constitution is trying to sort of codify the thing that's already going on. And another example, sort of another Christian example, is in the Bible. When the law is given to Israel, it's not given to them when they're at their best. It's not given to them when they're already following and doing all the things that they should be doing. It comes to them after they've been in a period of exile and slavery, and they're having to remember the ways of their generations past. So these are the areas that are under threat, and then God gives the law to them at that point. and I didn't expect to be using so many religious examples, but the concepts are at least transfer at some level.
Right. And I mean, that phrase from the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, I think is relevant here as well. You were talking about when you start writing things down, that's when they're in trouble. Now, do you think when it comes to the US Constitution, I know it's not the Declaration of Independence, but do you think that concept still applies, that the truths within the US Constitution are still self-evident, or does the fact that it is constantly being almost referenced as a document that will solve every problem, you just have to wave the piece of paper at the problem and it goes away, does that show that no, actually not, these truths are not are no longer as self-evident to the population at large?
It's a great question, and I think that a key part of this. So my headline being "The Constitution is Dead," and you use that for the title, which is it's a comment on the unwritten Constitution, the thing that the original Constitution was written to codify and saw as being under threat. That unwritten Constitution, the what constituted the United States at the time of the founding, has certainly passed, and is certainly something that's gone. And that's why appealing to a document that was written to govern a different kind of people. So it's this people that was moral, religious. John Adams talked about how the Constitution is written for a moral and religious people and is incapable of the government of any other. It is, yes, a difficult thing to try to apply something that was meant to govern a different kind of people, a different way of life to apply now. And that's not to say that what they were doing was a bad thing. I say in the video that it's not my saying that the Constitution is dead is not to fault the founders and not to say, hey, if only they would have tweaked a few words here and there, that none of this bad stuff that has become of the United States would have happened. But it's sort of anachronistic to grab that and say that this document can save us now. So it's I've got so many thoughts, so forgive me for jumping around.
Well, that's the whole point of long form conversations, that you can actually delve into some of these thoughts and you actually have the time to elaborate on them. And I think before we get to, I think the question that's jumping out that everyone really is chomping at the bit to have answered is what happened. But to answer that question, you have to start at the beginning. You actually have to start first at where did it all begin before you can answer what happened. And that question you touch on in your video, and it's condensed in the question, what was, to put emphasis on it, the American Constitution? Can you enlighten the audience on that question?
Yeah, well, the United States started as a colony of Great Britain, and if any analysis of what the United States became, and still what the core American identity is, has to start with that. And so there are a bunch of things that come with that. So English common law, we have sort of ways and customs. That the legal element obviously is important, but the cultural element is important as well. And so the American Constitution, again, is trying to unite a bunch of disparate states and figure out what they have in common and at least create some of that commonality as well. And so there are themes in there such as limited government. There are themes in there, federalism. There are things like the leaving quite a bit to the individual states and their state governments, including stuff like there was state establishment of religion. There were things that might make modern people who say they are constitutionalist and love the Constitution. The Constitution left quite a bit to the states to decide, and so all of those things were spelled out in the Constitution, and many of those things were then what got abolished by later regimes.
And then when it comes to particularly I think this is something for my South African audience that needs a little bit of explanation, is that the American Constitution has changed materially in regards to its contents over the centuries. Can you just, you don't have to go through all the different changes, but what were some of the major changes that happened since its conception till today, before we really delve into, but let's look at the big picture about what happened? What were some of the on-paper changes to the text itself?
Right. My thinking on this has depends quite a bit on the analysis of Curtis Yarvin in his essay, The Iron Polygon. And he talks about the sort of 4 different republics. The United States, we think of ourselves as having one continuous government from the time of the Constitution to now, because the document itself hasn't changed. It's still sitting, behind beautiful glass. And so we think of it as being inherently preserved because the paper is. But there have been plenty of changes. The Constitution itself was an abolishment of a previous document, which was the Articles of Confederation, and that was its own constitutional order, its own republic, at least in the thinking of Yarvin, and that was uniting the states in a way that the Articles of Confederation weren't. So the Articles of Confederation was a much more loose document, and there were many called the Anti-Federalists during the time that were much more pleased with that. And then the Constitution came along and abolished quite a bit of it became more centralized under the Constitution. And then after that, you've got many years after that, you've got the sort of tumultuous time of the American Civil War. And so during the American Civil War, the idea of federalism, the idea of states' rights, the idea of states deciding their own destiny was put to the test. And the right of secession of a state, that a state could leave the Union, was put to the test at that point. And so what you have there is the answer to that question became a unionist perspective, and that was what Yarvin calls it. And so the historical answer to the question was no, states may not do X, Y, and Z. And they may not secede, they may not decide their own destiny in really any respect, is what it's come out to be. And so if the Constitution abolished the Articles of Confederation, the Unionist Republic abolished federalism, abolished the idea that the federal government had its purview and the states had their purview, and that the federal government would leave quite a bit of that to the states themselves. And that was a really tumultuous thing, and that's the answer that people still have to the question of whether a state has the right to resist the federal government. And then comes along, so again, many years after that, you've got FDR. So if Lincoln was the strongman of the Unionist Republic, you have Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s and 40s, who basically abolished limited government. The government he created, everybody's heard the term administrative state, the deep state, those sort of terms. This was the creation of FDR. FDR created all of these 3-letter agencies that became sort of their own government. So when people think of the government now, they don't necessarily think first of the president and Congress. They think of these agencies that have existed throughout these administrations. And so the swamp, the thing that Trump talked about being so much of a problem, the deep state, all of that is a creation of FDR. And so FDR's creation of the deep state is the real government, the one that they may not be able to make laws, but they can by, the fact of what they're doing is making policy. They are leading the government. They're leading the states in a way that is not constitutional. And so going back to all of these things that were enumerated in the Constitution, those principles have been abolished in that sense. And then further on, I'm in debt here to the thought of Aaron McIntyre, our good friend Aaron McIntyre, for the civil rights regime, and as well as Christopher Caldwell. So the civil rights regime basically abolished free association. So now you've got with the Civil Rights Act, whereas you can argue about the intentions of the Civil Rights Act, but what it has come to mean is that the government agencies cannot allow anything outside of its any area of life outside of its purview. There's the government itself has to. It makes the task of government to abolish bias. And so bias is this thing that's in the psychology of humans. And so we have to root that out. And so the government becomes then, the phrase thought police from 1984, there is no area that the government cannot go. And so when you see all of these changes, you you have to be able to say, okay, that is not the way. You can have different opinions about all of these different regimes, all these changes, but what you can't say is that that is the exact constitutional order from the 18th century. There have been all of these changes. And so when you talk to a lot of people who say, I love the Constitution, I love America, what they mean is sort of what that status quo is now, what the Constitution as seen through the prism of all of these transformations. And so the text itself has changed in terms of amendments, but there's also no constitutional amendment allowed the New Deal. And the constitutional amendments that have been basically abolished by further amendments and further laws and regimes have been the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment to the American Constitution leaves quite a bit to the states. Says anything that is not mentioned here as being in the purview of the federal government is left to the states. That is not a reality now, at least to the extent. You can say that there are still sparks of it, and I love those sparks. I think that's a great thing. But the reality on the ground is that the federal government has no limit to its authority. So recognizing that, again, is not, I've had people accuse me and others who hold this view of being gleeful about the death of the American Constitution. You can tell, hopefully, in my summary of this, that I have a huge admiration for the founders and the people who wrote down these original documents. There were debates within the founders, and so I understand that, the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, but I have an admiration for these men, and also an admiration for the culture that they were trying to preserve, the reality, the nation that was there, and the unwritten Constitution. And so I mourn the fact that the unwritten Constitution of the 18th century is not, I don't have much access to that as a person living in 2025. And I mourn that. I also mourn that I don't have access to that legal order. But another person who's shaped my thought in a big way is Edmund Burke, and he talks about how that Roman law and Roman men fell at the same time, and so as the culture falls, the law falls as well and follows that. And at some level, you get the government that you deserve. So we've done all of this damage to the unwritten Constitution, and the legal. Those have traveled together. You can say you can argue about which one causes the other. Does the legal cause that? It goes both ways. The legal and the cultural are, if one goes, the other goes, and it doesn't have to be a single causal line.
Right. I can't help but see the little bit of parallel there. There's a bit of a Nietzschean flavor to your declaration that the US Constitution is dead. That's also not a triumphant or even a gleeful exclamation or stance from Nietzsche. It is also a dark warning and almost a lamentation of what is then to come after that state of affairs is reigning.
I think that's fair, and I think that what we do now becomes the big question. And so all of those, what we can't do though is think that we're going to just change the legal aspect of all this, and that we're going to recreate the culture of. So we can't rule the current insanity of the United States with the Constitution that was written for a different kind of people. Right. Back to the original point about John Adams. John Adams said that the U.S. Constitution is written for a moral and religious people, and that it cannot govern any other type of people. And so here we are. We're no longer moral or religious broadly. We can argue about that, and I think that's worth talking about, but at least not to the extent there. And so the Constitution itself, according to Adams, is not capable of governing this type of people. And there's a witticism that has been attributed to G.K. Chesterton, who I love, but I couldn't find the original source. But it's that if a man will not be governed by the 10 commandments, then he shall be governed by the 10,000 commandments. Yeah. And so if you will not be governed by limited law, if you will not be governed by the small law that gives you that has broad implications, then the law itself becomes this sort of thing following around decay. And so as moral decay happens, then you're going to get multiplication of laws, and you're going to get multiplications of commandments. The government grows, the government gets into everything. And that is, you can see that on the ground. You can see, okay, as people were able to govern their private lives, you can have a pretty limited government, sort of state. You can have a limited state. But as the nation itself becomes dissolute, law follows that. And that's consistent also with the thought of Edmund Burke, that people's passions form their fetters. The freedom that the founders wanted and wanted to preserve was something that is not, they weren't saying that this is something that is every human's birthright. What they were saying is that we have a people here who can handle that. And what Burke was talking about is that in France, during the French Revolution, they basically threw out any chance that they had to have a government that was fitted to the people. And they replaced it instead with a sort of rationalistic vision of what freedom was. And in doing that, they threw away everything in the process. And so Burke's thought was that freedom itself is not for everybody. Who it's for is it can be lost, it can be given up, and it's just sort of the way of the world that if you give up your freedom, then it's gone.
Right. And I mean, that reminds me of G.K. Chesterton's quote as well, that if you will not have rules, then you will have to settle for having rulers. And I mean, when it comes to particularly a lot of the metaphors that we use in this conversation, I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of these metaphors go back to religious metaphors. My previous guest, Professor Koos Malan, very explicitly talks about the South African constitutional order as a state religion in a very strong sense. And I think many constitutions are not maybe de jure, but de facto reduced to religious documents. But that really raises an important question, and I'd like to pick your brain on it. So in a Christian context, if someone were to want to add a new chapter to the Bible or remove a chapter, a book from the Bible, that has very, very strong implications for the Christian religion and all of the implications contained within. But then the question that's raised is, in the constitutional context, if someone then proposes an addition, if the Constitution is a reflection of the morals of the people that it governs or that created it, what are the implications then of someone wanting to add or remove substantially from that document?
Well, and that's a very well said. And I think that the reason that the American founders wrote in a provision for amendment is that they recognized that what they were doing was not a new canon. They were not building a new scriptural reality. What they were saying is that yes, there were going to be changes. There are going to be new things that come up that need to be defended, and new areas. They recognized that what they were doing was not the same thing again that the apostles were doing, or that Nicaea was doing. That's a different project. What they were doing was not solving every problem for all time. And a lot of conservatives in America, what we do is people will describe the American Constitution as having solved politics, as having solved the core political problem. And that the core political problem is not, this is the problem. The core political problem is not mechanical. It's not technical. You don't do it by if you set up the correct org chart, you don't solve humanity. You don't solve the human problem. And so they recognize that, and so in recognizing, and the amendment process shows that they did recognize that the problems they were solving were particular to their time. There would be future problems, and maybe they trusted us too much to be able to handle all the things that came up.
Right, and in particular, in regards to the current constitutional order that you find yourself in. You referenced the model by Curtis Yarvin in regards to the Civil Rights Act being the latest major constitutional shift, and that, as I understand it, is then the constitutional order that you are currently living in 2025. Especially for South Africans or anyone on the outside looking in. Can you just outline, you don't have to give a master's thesis on it, but outline what really changed in that transition into this new constitutional order, the civil rights constitutional order? What was the major seismic shifts that happened?
Well, the problem that the Civil Rights Act was attempting to address, on at least in the way it was pitched, was that there was mistreatment of Black people in America. People were there are all sorts of places in which people were being treated poorly, but also there were places where there were Blacks only places and there were whites only places. The Civil Rights Act comes in and says that none of those things are allowed. And who is going to be the enforcer of this? That always is the problem. So I understand why there are plenty of arguments for, hey, this is something that we should try to move away from if we're going to be a nation that is one nation. That's a perfectly defensible position, and I would defend it too. But the who gets to enforce, who benefits, and who becomes the sword, it becomes the federal government. And so the federal government then is not just making sure that every place in trying to make sure that every business has to serve everyone. Then the logic of the enforcement and the logic of the Civil Rights Act is the exact logic that the Colorado baker, there was a baker in Colorado who got chased around basically by a bunch of people who wanted him, a Christian baker who people wanted to make gay wedding cakes.
That's a story that has reached even South Africa. I think a lot of my listeners here will be familiar with it.
Great. And so he becomes this picture of, well, it's against my religious convictions. I will make cakes for people who are homosexuals, but I'm not going to make a cake celebrating a union that I think is illusory at some level. And so, okay, that cannot happen because of the Civil Rights Act and civil rights law that came later. And so you at some level realize that the logic at the beginning was flawed in such a way that led, not accidentally or either way, is connected to the logic of the Civil Rights Act. So that it's addressing something that was seen as a huge problem at the time through a sort of huge hammer that has impact still today. And so I wouldn't be surprised. I think that particular baker, I've forgotten his name, but he's had so as soon as one of these problems goes away, and as soon as it goes through all the courts, somebody else will come in and say, all right, now bake a cake. So he becomes this sort of lightning rod for civil rights sort of crusaders, which again, you can say, hey, we're solving a problem. It makes sense to try to solve a problem, but the way that the problem was solved led to plenty of problems later on. And I don't think that anybody would say that the Civil Rights Act solved the racial issues in America. If in 2025 you think that the 1964 Civil Rights Act solved racial animosity in the United States, it's a tough thing to defend. And so the basic mechanism, though, yes, is it removes free association. It removes, okay, I would like to have this place and be able to refuse anybody for any reason. And the civil rights people come back and say, well, what if it's a bad reason? And so that's the back and forth. And so the problem became, if it seems arbitrary to the state why you're refusing somebody, then the state then gets to fine you forever, get you tied up in the courts, and it becomes a way of trying to stamp out bigotry, or as it's phrased, bigotry, but really it becomes stamping out any sort of internal bias, so that it's not just overt acts of refusal of service for any reason, but also the reason that the Sheetz, so it's Sheetz is a gas station chain, and they had a background check that they would give to anybody who was coming in to be employed by them, applying for a job. And somebody sued them because the results of those background checks reflected negatively in a disproportionate way toward Black people. And so because of this, they are just not because Sheetz was saying, hey, no Black applicants, but because the policy itself led to fewer Black employees, or more Black people being turned away. That was then turned into a case that they got chased around and had to, I think that's still going on, actually, that case, which is insane. And so any amount, not just free association in explicit terms, but also having any kind of standard for behavior in what we're going to be, because that might, in some statistical way, not be equal. So that if things turn out, if it turns out that you don't hire this type of person, it may not be because you don't like this type of person, but because things just worked out to where that's the statistics of who your employees are, then you are deemed all sorts of bad names, but also deemed a sort of a case study and something that needs to be dragged through the courts for years and years.
And another thing that flowed out of the Civil Rights Act is the idea of disparate impact. And I think this is, before we get into that concept, it just immediately reminds me, when I heard about that concept for the first time and I read about what it actually means, it immediately reminded me of the South African ideology of transformationism that pretty much dictates that every facet of society, whether it be sports teams, corporate boardrooms, school classrooms, everything needs to be perfectly scientifically, demographically representative of the racial profile of the nation or the country at large, which means, and according to this ideology of transformationism, if any space is found that is not perfectly representative of the demographic profile of the country's population, that means there was definitely discrimination that led to that outcome. And immediately I saw the parallel with disparate impact, which is an American idea. But can you just explain what disparate impact is, please?
Yes, so that's the concept that meant that the Sheetz gas station got to get sued. You know, it has to be sued under civil rights law because of disparate impact. The impact being, yes, things have to be. Everyone has to have perfect representation of the entire country, no matter what region you're in, and no matter
what activity, doesn't matter what type of space.
Right, and so these places that have any kind of, and so what it does, it does erase any kind of behavioral change. So if we have standards of, hey, this is how we dress, or this is having some kind of again, the criminal record thing. So the criminal background check was the issue with Sheetz. And there's a statistical reality that Black people are going to be more likely to be refused because of negative results on a criminal background check. And it's not saying we don't want any Black people here. What it's doing is just trying to say, hey, we have a standard for behavior. We don't want to hire criminals. We don't want to hire somebody who's going to steal from the cash register. But yes, because that disproportionately impacted Black applicants, that became a problem. So yes, it is the same. And that is an example of the fact that this law and the civil rights regime moves beyond just the legal realm. So being back to at some level the Christian context, there I've heard people and talked to people who say if your church doesn't reflect the demographics of your entire city or your entire state or your entire nation at some level, then you have set up barriers. You have set up some kind of arbitrary barrier for that. No matter whether you live in North Idaho like I do, or live in St. Louis or whatever, everything has to be evened out. and I think what that does is it just means that you don't have any actual diversity of living, so that churches with different cultures can't grow up, and businesses that have different levels, like these cultures can't grow up, and you can't see what they are, because everything has to be sort of managed from the top. And what that does, why the state loves doing that sort of thing, is that it gives them all the power in the world. It's not just an ideology. It's not just, oh, it would be nice if there were one of each kind of face and everything, all the percentages were evened out. It's also really nice. It's a really great control mechanism, because what it does is it just turns everybody into every church, every business, into a place where we have to intervene. If we don't intervene, then the gods are going to be angry with us. And in the U.S., it would be the civil rights gods who are going to be angry with us, or the transformationism gods. I really enjoyed your interview with Dr. Milan, or Professor Milan, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah, it was great. I'm planning on reading his books. But yes, that level of thinking is just it becomes a problem, because again, I've said this many times already, but no area of life is outside of the realm of the state in that way of thinking. And yeah, it turns people, and so the enforcers of it are not just the laws. So like the church thing, what I mentioned earlier, that's not something that legally people say, oh, your church has to be this percentage, or the leadership in your church has to be this percentage. But it just becomes part of the culture. So the legal change creates this culture where if you're planting a new church, if the PCA is planting a new church, then they have to make sure that the elder board looks exactly the way that the entire city does, no matter where in the city that church is going to be. And it's a big problem, because like if this totalitarian state impulse happens, then all of a sudden all these enforcers come up that don't work for the state, but believe the exact same principles. And so this tyranny just becomes felt all over the place, not just in the places where the government has said it is.
Yeah, and I mean, during lockdown and during the COVID era, the government didn't need to pay those people that snitched on their neighbors that were walking outside. People just fulfill the role. They see where the zeitgeist wind is blowing, and then they slot in. They realize what needs to be done to protect the reigning order, and it just starts happening naturally. There's no conspiracy needed.
Well, and back to the point about unwritten and written constitutions. There's, at some level, the unwritten Constitution of the United States was revealed during the COVID era, because snitching is amazing. It's and people walking around freely in a park, holding hands with their wives, like that is the thing that can be persecuted if the state says differently. And so the unwritten Constitution became apparent, and just showed how far away we are from the amount of freedom and liberty that just existed at the time of the founding. And again, I mourn for it. It's not something I'm gleeful about. Again, I fought the COVID tyranny as much as I could as a random citizen in Texas when I was there. But that was, yeah, the unwritten Constitution and the written one feed into each other, and and so, yeah, it becomes the project. I don't envy the project of the current executive regime in America, the Trump, the MAGA world, because they're ruling a country. They're ruling a people who is dissolute, and it's the same people who were those sort of moralistic snitches that happened in 2020. That's the culture that culture hasn't gone away just because COVID has gone away. It's still the reigning kind of thing. But I think as the Democrats become and the left becomes more and more demoralized in America, hopefully that culture can go into hiding.
And you see so many parallels in South Africa as well. You see it especially in the sports world. So in South African sports, there are hardline like race quotas. You need to have a certain percentage of every race group perfectly representative in your team. And then you'll have opposition teams snitch on each other. If the opposition team is not meeting the perfect race quota, their opponents will go to the referee or to the judging authorities and tell them, I lost this match, but we were up against a team that didn't fulfill the race quotas. They need to be disqualified. And then they are disqualified and fined. It happened this year again with a professional cricket team in South Africa, that the Warriors, they were disqualified from the tournament and they were fined because they didn't have the right racial makeup of their team. And we've seen many bizarre examples. In it goes down all the way to primary school levels. Even children are being discriminated against by these types of laws in South Africa. I mean, how does a parent explain to their child, I mean, your team won, but your team was disqualified because your team didn't have the right racial bean counting metrics? It happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago where there was a team that just made the race quota metrics, just made the cut in the criteria. And then one of the black players got injured and he was forced to be replaced by a white player, and then disqualifying the team because the team then fielded a team that was not meeting the perfect racial metrics that wow. the transformation gods gave us, and therefore the team had to be disqualified. There was no choice, even though they won the match. There's so many examples from South Africa in the workplace as well. There was there's legislation that made it in one of the provinces there. So maybe I just have to put this little context there for Americans listening. There's an ethnic group in South Africa called the colored population, which is an ethnic group that appears on the census. It's not a slur. It's not a strange street term. It's a very large ethnic group in South Africa. You can go look up their history. Fascinating stuff. But there's one province in South Africa where there's almost no colored people living there. There's less than 1% of the population that live there comes from this ethnic group. And then this new Employment Equity Act stipulates that the workplace needs to be representative of the population of the province at large, which meant that because less than 1% of the population in that province is colored, that it means that if a company doesn't have 100 employees, if it has less than 100 employees, they are barred from hiring anyone from this ethnic group, because then they would have more than 1% of their workforce represented by a population group that is not 1% of the province. So that's a reality. It's not some theoretical abductio ad absurdum. It's an actual thing that happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the sports example is particularly interesting because the examples you gave were the ones that were trying to disqualify winners, right. Which is there. A lot of the way things go, there's an ugly kind of envious trying to crush the competition by any means necessary. That is not. It's not. There are true believers. There are ideologues, and then there are other people who also just like to use the ideology to beat people over the head because they get out ahead. They win because they followed all the rules. Yeah, it's the exact same logic of the COVID tyranny. I don't have to, I don't have to be a good person. I can just follow, the 10 rules, and then I'm good again with the transformation gods. They've made my team okay, even if my team is not very good, or even if my business is not doing very well. So imagine you're having to build not just all the challenges that come with building a business and running up and leading a bunch of employees, but also the challenges of having to deal with all of these roadblocks that are set up to just trying to make people's lives better, trying to sell a product, trying to, or even win a game. It creates a bunch of random things that it doesn't make it more fun for the audience at the cricket game, at the cricket match or whatever, oh, good. I can breathe easy. Everybody's proportionally exactly where they should be. It's not there to make the experience better for people or even for the players. It doesn't help the black player who got injured that the whole team gets disqualified. That's not being kind to that guy. But what it does is,
then any player who's given an advantage through race quotas, no player can then that makes the team can ever know for certain whether he is a quota player or got there on merit. I mean, I can't imagine what that does to your self-esteem. I'm just very glad I was never in that situation, because I come from a discriminated against group. So I knew everywhere that I qualified, I did it on merit, not based on my skin color. And I can't imagine what that does to your self-esteem if you can never know for certain whether you got the job or the place in the team on merit, or whether it was just your skin color. They needed you to fulfill the bean counting metrics.
Oh, absolutely, and especially for, I think for men, especially, there's a sense of, oh, I did the thing because I was the right guy for that
Mm,
job. I was supposed to be there, and
right.
if I wasn't there, then this wouldn't have gone the way that it went. That's something that just men need to have, and for somebody to
Mm,
say, "Hey, great job, we picked you, and it's because of you." That feels real. That boosts people up. It makes them better.
mm,
But if people are wondering and having to constantly guess as to whether they're diversity hires or quota fillers, then yeah, they won't rise to the occasion, because that's not encouraging. That doesn't push people on to be the best version of themselves. And for all we know, there could be another arrangement where, hey, you actually know that you were picked for this job because you're you.
mm.
The psychology that tyranny sort of creates is a monstrous thing, and it's horrible for individuals and also for families. Imagine imagine a woman married to a guy who doesn't know if what he's doing is because he's good at what he does.
Right.
He's either discouraged or questioning constantly. She doesn't know whether to respect him for what he does, or to think
Mm.
that, oh, they just let him in. That's
And what
it
if the
messes up
rules
the
change? Then he's going to lose his
yes, yeah.
position.
Right. Oh yeah. And the things that tyranny does to people, I think is truly tragic. And you hate to see as many variety. It's strange how various it can be while still having the same level of. It's
Mm,
about power. It's about envy, and that just crushes ambition and skill. It's a terrible thing. But
mm,
the effect, again, back to unwritten constitutions, the effect that has on a people. So we're talking individuals,
mm,
husbands, wives, but the effect that has on a group of people.
mm.
What are you doing to this group by treating them this way? You're not helping them. What you're doing is you're turning them neurotic. Why you're making a whole class of people, a whole group, just multiply their neuroses, and yeah, that doesn't have good long-term consequences.
No. No wonder South Africa is in the terrible state that it is in. Um,
Mm,
Wade, there's another question that almost naturally flows from how our conversation so far has gone, and we've touched on it, but we've not answered it. We've kind of joked about it, and by using terms like the transformation gods or the civil rights gods, but the real question that really demands to be answered without just winking at it is, but where does power then lie? Where does authority lie? And through all these different changes to a constitution, where is that engine room of change then? I think that's the question that really needs to be answered.
right. Well, the civil rights regime that we currently live under
Mm,
is inherently in the U.S. Is inherently a bureaucratic rule.
mm,
And so it becomes, so the thing about bureaucracies is that they are faceless, and one of the advantages for the bureaucrats is that there's nobody to blame. So when people say, so Joe Biden, who was president for 4 years, whatever. When people say, okay, who was really running the country? Who was really the president? Who was really signing all of these things? And the answer comes out, oh, it was actually just a machine that was. So there's an auto pen where people put a
mm,
part in, put the piece of paper down, and there's there's a machine that signs Joe Biden's name. It's a picture of exactly how we've been governed for longer than I've been alive. It's the faceless. It's a machine. It's this sort of thing that exists to preserve itself.
mm,
And so it would be nice. It would be really nice to know, hey, that this is the guy who did the bad thing. But when you
mm,
dig past the faces that get put onto bureaucracy, it's just lines of people in offices and desks. So who was the person who really ran COVID tyranny? We in the US would say, okay, it was Dr. Fauci, right? He was the face. Or maybe it was this person, maybe it was that person. But the truth was that it was this network of people who were there, not necessarily because they love America and think that, they don't look at a picture of George Washington and get emotional. They're there to preserve their job. and they're there because they're very good at bean counting. They're good at they're running systems. And that's the kind of system that creates tyranny, because this bureaucracy is naturally going to try to grow. And it reminds me also of Conquest. Robert Conquest was a political thinker and historian. And he talked about how a bureaucratic organization, as it becomes bureaucratic, it looks more and more like it's being run by a cabal of its enemies. And so why does America look like it was for many years governed by a cabal of enemies of America? It's because of the bureaucratic nature of what was going on. So we don't have anybody to praise. People get praise and people get blame, but we don't really know who all is doing it, because papers get handed around and tasks get handed around. So who made the call? There's really not anybody, because we're trying to erase hierarchy. We think hierarchy is a bad thing in hierarchy and in jobs and in the government. As you erase that, then you erase accountability. You also erase praise and blame. So and I think that as Trump himself, you see this also where when Trump comes in and starts acting like the president. So he's almost a throwback to the executive branch as pictured in the Constitution. All right, so he comes in, and then people say he's acting outside of constitutional authority. And so Trump, being the closest to an actual executive that we've had in a long time, he gets called unconstitutional. And that just goes to show, hey, we don't live in that kind of world. And so the more like the original Constitution people try to act, or like previous presidents before the 20th century people try to Trump acts like, the more like Andrew Jackson Trump tries to act, then people go, well, he's a brand new, he's an insane dictator who's just come from nowhere. And you go, well, he's doing, you can point to historical precedents, but people don't have the access to that in their minds because of, again, all these transformations that have happened between now and then. So yeah, who's pulling the strings? Who's doing this stuff? It's the ugly answer is it's a faceless system that's faceless by design, which is tragic for the people living under it. Who was running COVID tyranny and who was really running the White House? Have you ever seen the movie Brazil? Terry Gilliam directed it. Okay,
I'm sure many of my audience have. I know it's a very popular movie.
Good. Okay, so for the folks who haven't seen it, and you should watch it for sure. It's this system that's basically about this bureaucratic existence where it opens up. I won't spoil it. But there are plenty of things that happen, and you go, okay, who was the person who actually killed this person? Well, you can't really answer that because, well, there was the person who did the killing, and then there's a person who arrested the guy, and there's a person who ordered that, and then all the way up at the top of this, you get a mistake, a clerical mistake. So who's responsible? Is it where along the chain do we find accountability? It's so who is running the White House becomes a lot like the question, who killed Mr. Buttle in Brazil, and you'll understand that once you see it. But it's an excellent movie, and I think anybody who is trying to even understand how bureaucracy works and how frustrating it is, but it's also a very funny movie and good in that sense as well. So I'd recommend everybody watch that.
Definitely put it on my list. Going to read some questions and comments here from the chat before we continue. Sideline Opinion says, if you capture the judiciary applying and interpreting the Constitution, you capture the Constitution. Well, that's a point that many of my colleagues in the Solidarity Movement and AfriForum have made many times, is that power does not lie within the document of the Constitution. The power lies within those interpreting the Constitution, because you can see exactly in South Africa how that's playing out, where the Constitution will say one thing and then you just need a judge to interpret it in his own way, and then that becomes the new precedent, especially with judgments from our constitutional court. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, Wade, before we continue.
I think that's a totally fair point. I don't really have much to add other than, yes, there's a reality that people like to think. Again, there's the document and it says the words. Why hasn't it fixed the problem yet?
Right.
And yeah, it's because
why doesn't everyone interpret it the same way as I do? The Constitution is clear.
Yeah, well, and as a person who admires the people who wrote the Constitution, and it's knowing that it's in the hands of people who don't admire those people,
Mm.
that is what breaks my heart. You know,
Yeah.
I love not just the written Constitution, but what gave birth to it, and the
Yeah.
men who gave birth to it, and the piece of paper itself and the words themselves came from a certain culture, from certain people.
Mm.
And what we should do, and the founders themselves talked about this. I wish I could remember where this particular quote came from, but that if you're trying to make a law, if you're trying to make an addition, if you're trying to continue things, then you have to go, what did these people love who wrote this originally? What were their loves? What were their hates? The things that they wanted to guard, and that's going to give you guidance for the future. And that we've obviously ignored that, but that's a much better way of doing things. And so it's not arbitrary. Oh, whoever has the paper is right. Whoever's holding the paper is right. Anyway, but go ahead. I've too many thoughts. Keep going.
No, well, it's an important point because
yes,
particularly here in South Africa, we've seen so many examples of people saying, well, when I read the law, when I read the Constitution, it's so clear to me what the people that wrote it meant. But why can't these judges see that? Why are they reading it? Or these politicians, why are they reading and interpreting it in a different way? Well, I think, as is the case with most documents, if you torture it long and intensely enough, it will tell you anything you want to hear. And I think the constitutions are no different.
Well, I'll say one thing also. I think that every political party, or at least in the U.S., has tried to appeal to rationalism. And so there, especially in conservative circles, people think, well, I read the words and I graphed out the sentences. And now and even if you're correct about the way that this is handled, you're ignoring what really motivates people. And it's not logic chopping. People want things, and so they will do what they need to do to get what they want.
Right.
And that's a basic human reality that anybody who reads a fiction book knows, or anybody who sees a movie knows. People will take advantage of systems, and we are not logic machines who just need the right input and then the calculator. We're not AI. We don't get the input. We are desire machines, and that's a very different sort of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of our rationalization is post hoc, where we have the conclusion first, and then we try to rationalize it. But I mean, when it comes to many of the moral statements and moral stances that people take, they didn't come to it through rationalization. People don't get to their moral stances through reading all the canon in regards to what philosophical debates have been had over this moral stance, and then they decide, well, from now on, my moral stance is going to be this. That's simply not how it works. Lowbrow Mtakati says, glad to see Wade finally made it out of his garage. Or maybe he is still there. It's just dark.
Yeah, I'll turn the lights on. I've still got the boxes. I'm here. I got my screws and tools are here, everybody.
Everyone needs a screws and tools box. And tools box. Also from Lowbrow, who says, Wade makes a great point. The state... I just lost it there. The state gives itself carte blanche to poke its nose into every crevice of business and social life, freedom of association, and private rights. Be damned. Well, that pretty much sounds like the ANC government here in South Africa to a T. And then Lowbrow also says, for a great book on constitutionalism, written and non-written, read Martin van Staden's The Constitution and the Rule of Law, an introduction. Yes, well, that's, I think, particularly relevant to the South African context. Martin van Staden is one of the most relevant minds when it comes to constitutionalism in South Africa today. Also, the researcher that, if you ever cite the fact that South Africa has over 145 race laws, Mr. van Staden is the reason to thank for that. He actually did the down and dirty work of going into the depths of the South African government's long list of race laws and actually quantifying a number of, this is the amount of race laws the South African government has. So that's also something that Martin is famous for. Sideline Opinions gives a 14 Rand super chat. Thank you very much.
I did. I was gonna
Yeah,
on Lowbrow's
sure.
point. You mentioned the South African book. The one great book to kind of summarize the civil rights regime that spent quite a bit of time talking about. Christopher Caldwell's book, The Age of Entitlement.
I have it
If
on my
anybody wants to pick.
bookshelf. When
Oh,
I
good.
was at
Okay.
NatCon last year, someone gave me a copy.
Oh, it is excellent. So anybody who is curious about that, and Christopher Caldwell is much better at explaining this stuff than I am off the cuff. But if you're interested in that section of this, everybody should check that out.
Fantastic. And then Lowbrow gives a 140 Rand super chat for the microphone fund. Wade has a nice thick black one. Well, I'll definitely no more donations for the microphone or camera fund, please. I've got enough funds now. Really, this YouTube channel is not a charity case. I almost said it like tongue in cheek. If you really want to help me out, I will use those funds to try and make the channel better. But yeah, if you want to give a super chat, that's fine. But I'm not going to be asking for them. Gerrit Jansen van Rensburg also gives a 70 Rand super sticker. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Then, Wade, as we start getting to the end of our conversation, I really want to leave the most, I think, important question, but I also think deceptively simple question for last. And that is the question, well, what do we do next? Whether that we is here in South Africa or you there in the United States, what do you do next if you take into account all of the realities that we've put on the table here tonight, the state of affairs, the warts and all, whether that be some of it idealistic or not, all the realities that we've described here tonight in the context of the United States and America, but you can speak from the American context. What is there to be done when all of this is taken into account?
Well, I think that first, recognizing what the problem is huge. So I don't want to undersell the value of just talking about the problems, because that's most of a sort of a doctor's visit, right? So if a doctor comes in and explains the extent of the problem, then you can spend very little time talking about treatment. So treatment becomes, oh, well, of course we got to do X, Y, and Z. So I don't want to dismiss the amount of time that we spent talking about the problem, especially in the U.S. And I think that whatever, I'm heartened by the actions of the Trump administration. One element of this that I think we didn't hit on, but is a huge focus of the Trump administration is migration. And so when I talked about the people creating a way of life that is then written down, or at least in an attempt to preserve it, migration becomes a huge issue when you start talking about unwritten constitutions. Who are the people? What assumptions do they bring to how society should be governed, but also basic cultural practices?
Especially when you're talking about truths that are self-evident.
Yes, absolutely. And those things come with being raised in a house that did things a certain way, and that was shaped by the houses that those parents came from, and that those things get inculcated over the course of generations. And when you have entirely different civilizational blocks, again, a term that Professor Milan used, when you have different civilizational blocks trying to be governed by one state, that's a difficult thing. And so addressing the migration issue is something that I think is going to be a huge step toward restoring a somewhat recognizable American unwritten constitution. And so I think that's a great place to start. And also recognizing, hey, there are going to be steps that we need to take to reinforce to let people live normal lives, people who want to live normal lives, encourage that. So I'm heartened, like I said, by the actions of the Trump administration. I think we've got plenty of room to grow and places to go. I think that the basic building blocks of society have to be restored. And there are things that the government can do to get out of the way of that. And there are things that they can do also to maybe encourage that, create a sort of greenhouse for healthy families, healthy churches, healthy communities. And I think that that's a huge piece of it. So regrowing that unwritten constitution. is a huge part of the work that needs to happen. It's something that the government, that the state cannot do directly, but what it can do is encourage the flourishing of things. We've seen the state in the United States encourage the flourishing of all sorts of nasty things. So it has the power. It can do that. It can encourage a certain kind of culture, back to the COVID point. But and so it is possible for a state to encourage healthy things as well, and permanent things, natural life. And so I think that those are just sort of hints at solutions, but also recognizing, hey, we cannot just pull out the Constitution that was written in the 1700s and hope to recapture the life that was there. I think that point's got to be made before we can start talking about next steps.
Right, but I mean that question has to be tackled at some point. I mean the conversation regarding the nature of the problem is very important, but at some point when a train has derailed and all the experts have come in, people have written articles about the derailed train, they've drawn schematics of the derailed train, they've taken pictures of the derailed train, they've made 3D models of the derailed train, they've created digital simulation showing how the train derailed. They've made documentaries about the derailed train. At some point, someone has to ask the question, all right, but what next? What do we do now? We see the problem very clearly. At some point, someone has to be brave enough to tackle the question, all right, what now?
Yeah. Well, and the fact that we have that our ruling class in the U.S. And the ruling class in South Africa have a totalizing vision for the way things ought to be. And they are comfortable answering every question in life. They have a sort of system that makes them think that they can answer every question for the individual and for the community. And that kind of energy and that kind of certainty are not going to be replaced by waffling or relativism, or any of that sort of thing. There's a place for, hey, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. But that's not relativism. What that is I'm a Protestant, and I'll quote Edmund Burke on this. So Burke said, "We are not Protestants."
My audience are majority Afrikaners there. We're all Protestants.
Oh, great. So I'll quote an Anglo-Protestant. I hope your Afrikaans audience wouldn't mind. Afrikaner audience wouldn't mind. But so he said, "We are Protestants not from indifference, but from zeal." And so there's a way of saying, hey, we can have variety here that is indifference, but there's also a way to say, hey, we can have variety here that's out of zeal for the core and zeal for the truth. And I think that's what we have to be able to bring to anything coming up next. There's certainty, there's will, and there's not knowing when to answer and when not to. But yeah, you can't replace a force like the left, a destructive force like the left, with nothing and with just getting out of the way. There has to be met with again a force of good can exist and does exist. There's not just you could talk about force for good, but when most people think of that, they think of an indifference of good, a stepping back of good, or a sort of giving in of good. And you have to meet a real animated left with a real animated right, to use those terms if anybody wants to. But that's my, again, just gesturing toward a solution. I'm just a guy, again, in a garage with screws and tools. So I can't rule anything, but having certainty, knowing what we want, and being comfortable saying what Americans want is a great step. It's, I think, the direction that Trump is taking, that Vance is taking. And again, I am hopeful for the future of the U.S.
That's fantastic. I've got a comment here from Sideliner Opinions who says, "Thank you, Wade, for showing interest in and support for the lone voices like Conscious Caracal from South Africa." Well, I'm very glad that Wade could give us some of his valuable time here to come to talk about a topic that I think is not just relevant or deeply relevant in the United States, but also for my South African audience. But Wade, one last question, and this is a question that a lot of my guests sometimes pause with because they don't. It's a lot of pressure, but I'm sure you'll be up to the task. if you could inception a question or a thought into my audience's minds to chew on, that they're forced to think about this week, something to keep at the back of their minds. It can be brief, it can be anything. What would you place there for them to really to grapple with this week?
I knew this was coming, and I did not think about it ahead of time, which is a horrible, horrible thing. But
even if it's something that you're currently thinking about, you can share that. Maybe my audience will be useful for them as well.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I'm thinking through right now, I'm reading a lot of Burke and a lot of G.K. Chesterton, and so these are two guys who I think saw a lot of the same problems. They saw a lot of the same problems, and Chesterton sees Burke as being having a particular view of things. So Chesterton sees Burke and he says, "Oh, Burke over here, he's a political atheist," meaning that what he's just saying that we are totally shaped by our environments, and there's nothing that people are. People are nothing but products of their environment. But then you have Burke over here who's talking also about the French government. He's talking about during the French Revolution that it was on its way to being a state shaped by the character of its people. And so that duality. And again, like Russell Kirk talking about Rome falling as men fell. That duality of feeding the state, the environment, feeding in, and this relationship between the people and their environment being something that is not a one-way communication. I'm thinking a lot about that right now, mainly because Burke and Chesterton are making me think about it. But if there are other people out there who want to wrestle through this with me and read Chesterton and Burke with me, then I would be thrilled.
Fantastic. No, I think that's some nice homework for my audience. I hope it's fruitful for them. Wade, the most easy question of all is really just if people like your thoughts and what they heard here tonight, it's the first time they hear you, where can they find more of Wade?
I am Wade Stotts on X and The Wade Show with Wade on YouTube. I also do a podcast on Canon Plus, canonplus.com, and it's called The Wadecast with Wade. And I've had Ernst here on, I think, twice already, and I need to have you back on. I think that'd be a thrill. But yeah, so check out my stuff. I'm everywhere.
Fantastic. And then also just thank you for my audience that tuned in live. I know most of you only really listen after we've already been live. So for those of you who are listening now, when it's no longer live, you can still share all of your thoughts and questions in the comment section. I read all of them, appreciate all of them. And but also special thanks to those who tune in live. You're definitely an elite club of people that really always show up when there's something going on this channel, and I really appreciate it. Wade, thank you very much for your insights. It was a privilege to meet you in person and talk to you in person last year, and hopefully in the future, once again, we can have a conversation. But tonight's conversation was fantastic, and I really appreciate the insights that you came to share here, not just with me, but with my audience as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It really has been a pleasure.
Excellent. And then if you're new to this channel and you like these types of conversations and content, you can subscribe, and I'll be going live or not live next week. Next week, a pre-recorded episode will be uploaded where I talk to Rob Harsov, the entrepreneur and investor. I know my South African audience will be well acquainted with Mr. Harsov. And we talked about the saying, business and politics don't mix. And Rob's point of view was that is just a blatant lie. So you can be looking forward to that one as well. Wade, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Good luck with all of your content creation, and also with the ideas that you're currently wrestling with. We'll chat again real soon.
Thank you very much. See ya.
And then to my audience, cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.